Art can be a powerful tool to create spaces of resistance to menstrual stigma and to counter cultural notions about menstruation. This is especially effective when artworks challenge normative, medical and spiritual or universalizing understandings. Representations of menstruation in sound, creative writing, visual and performance art can offer insights into the diversity of menstrual experiences which are not represented in broader visual culture or not often represented there, and expectations of regular, regulated and invisible bleeding. My research focuses on my artistic practice in relation to feminist art from the 1970s to the present, producing works about or within menstruation, or with menstruation, sorry. While feminist art has been written about extensively and there's a growing body of work on menstruation and its visual cultures, comparatively little academic writing has centred on menstrual art itself. Sitting within a context of a broader movement of activism and consciousness raising around menstruation, and in the face of deeply held stigma, menstrual art has often been read as celebratory as a default, as it propels the usually hidden phenomenon into the public realm. However, uncritically foregrounding the celebration of menstruation through art can perpetuate gender essentialism, rather than work against stigmatising and exclusionary ideas and language. For example, one of the most well-known, kind of more recent examples of menstrual art are Vanessa Teague's Menstrual Paintings. Teagues coined the term menstruala to describe her series of 88 paintings made with menstrual blood, and the term has been used to describe other works made with menstrual blood as their medium. For Teagues, menstruation is a divine and spiritual part of being a woman, with text accompanying the menstrual on her website stating, "May the world become universal, just like our cycles." I think in this room we all know, however, that menstrual cycles are not universal or uniform. In 2017, Teagues wrote the following on the Menstruala Facebook page. We do not know how long our moon has been orbiting the Earth or where it came from. However, we do know that the human female fertility cycle is unquestionably linked to it. She goes on. In mainstream society, menstrual blood is still being used as a tool for invalidation instead of being respected as a coveted symbol of women's cyclical reproductive capacity and her natural ability to bleed for days without dying. Yeah, so a little bit. While I agree that menstruation is still a site of oppression and invalidation, this kind of statement illustrates some of the ways thinking about menstruation and menstrual art through a spiritual lens can be problematic. It draws deep links between the ability to menstruate and womanhood, positioning menstrual fluid as a mystic substance and linking menstruation and fertility to nature in ways that might, perhaps not intentionally, exclude people who cannot menstruate or are not able to become pregnant from their definition of womanhood. That's not to say that viewing menstruation through only a more scientific or medical lens is itself without problems, and some of those do kind of overlap with these kind of more spiritual feminist ideas too. So, in contrast, Jen Lewis's Beauty in Blood, started in 2015, presents menstrual blood in abstracted forms dropped into water. In her artist statement, Lewis foregrounds the need to destigmatise and re-evaluate our relationship to menstrual blood as part of everyday life for men and women. Lewis's work is grounded in the everyday, where Teagues draws on more spiritual and mystical themes. So I propose that menstrual artworks can have greater impact if we read them through a revelatory lens, showing aspects of what is known and experienced, rather than being framed simply as beautiful, unknown, or mystic occurrences. The framing of menstrual art in this way foregrounds radical alternatives which reflect multiple realities of menstruation, while bypassing the more polished, sanitised, and censored visual narratives of the menstrual product industry. It also offers a critical space to consider how artists draw on a range of visual and performative strategies to subvert stigma and afford insights into the usually private phenomenon of menstruation. So I'm going to talk about my work very briefly. So cycles, shown here, and a little bit of it is there and in the cabinets outside. It was made between 2016 and 17, and it's a project I started as a way to confront my painful and consistent menstrual cycle, where I made a single print each evening for 6 months by applying paint to my vulva with a small brush on my fingers and transferring the ink and any menstrual fluid present to the cloth. This piece is made of 6 3-metre long hand-stitched scrolls which I do have in my bag if anyone actually wants to see the scrolls, each divided into around 28 sections, sometimes a few more or less, by a knotted red stitch. The white scrolls were intended to suggest the clinical or sanitary connotations of the invisible medicalised period, but also the private sphere. White sheets, white pads and tampons, white knickers, the dread of staining any of them. This work presents my body in neither a normative 28-day cycle, the notion reinforced particularly by the now widespread use of hormonal contraceptives, nor fulfilling the further promise of a cycle fully controlled and rendered invisible through the stopping of menstrual flow through this form of technological manipulation, provided by the hormonal contraceptives as my stubborn breakthrough bleeding continued throughout. The artworks was made while I was taking the progesterone-only pill, and now I have a Mirena coil and don't bleed very often, but experience premenstrual symptoms like severe cramping still, which is really fun. So, moving on. Menstrual art, in my opinion, is at its most powerful when it opens our eyes to the range of menstrual experiences, rather than presenting blood as inherently beautiful or mystical. Only, it can do that too. It can become a vehicle to critique attitudes, expectations, and the big business of single-use menstrual products. For example, cloths, on the screen now, created by Karina Ubeda, is a mixed media installation. The prints presents 5 years of Ubeda's menstrual fluid collected on 90 cloths, mounted in embroidery hoops that hung from the ceiling. And the black parts are apples that were hung and are kind of decaying. So the pieces are embroidered with different phrases, such as se processa, which means it's processed, se domine, which means it dominates, and se traspara, it is transferred. And if I've translated any of that wrong, I do apologise. Like me, Ubeda began this piece as a confrontation of menstrual discomfort. She was using the cloths in her everyday menstruation to collect her menstrual blood instead of commercial disposable pads, which gave her an allergic reaction. So, as with my work, the artist has created a documentary artwork which highlights the cyclical process of menstruation, and it being not a single event but continuing serialised occurrences. So the art historian Rhys Green-Cole, drawing on Judith Butler, says, the cyclic continuation of performative acts creates the appearance of a natural state. To understand menstruation as gendered blood is to recognise the ritualisation of difference through cleansing practices, psychoanalytic classifying and other constructs that affect the position of women. To refuse or fail to manage and cleanse away the menstrual blood, as many menstrual artists do, is to trouble the boundaries of traditional kind of feminine performance of gender. And this is kind of a very blunt comparison, but the performative aspects of menstruation are perhaps more evidently made explicit in performative work such as mine and in performance art. So on the screen now, you see I Want Your Blood, devised and choreographed by the American artist Kristen Clifford, which explicitly builds on the legacy of earlier feminist performance art, such as Leslie Labovitz's Menstruation Wait, performed in 1971. Clifford employs 2 young naked men as her living brushes, to use Klein's term, to produce a visceral and dramatic blood-drenched subversion of Yves Klein's monotone symphony, which is the image on the other side of the slide. Klein carefully choreographed his role as the male artist directing a group of female collaborators, and this is turned on its head by Clifford. She dresses, as Klein did, in formal attire and takes control of that performative language developed by Klein and subverts it in her menstrual symphony. Other people that have written about menstrual art have pointed to the use of gendered space, pointing mostly to domestic spaces which are commonly associated with periods. Sorry, am I in the way of the screen for some people? In an article from the online arts and culture magazine Hyperallergic, Hrag Vartanian notes that many pop cultural references and even works like Chicago's relegate the bodily function to the bathroom, which is a space that is often gendered and segregated. It continues, more recent work, at least in the art world, often removes the connotation of a bathroom into a more neutral space, like the gallery's white box. The artwork reference, I'm sure many of you know, is Judy Chicago's 1972 installation Menstruation Bathroom, which there's a detail of on the slide. It features bloodied menstrual products spilling out of a domestic bathroom bin. Chicago's other famous menstrual artwork, Red Flag, on the other part of the slide, is a closely framed photolithograph of the tampon being removed. It hasn't got a definite location because of kind of the composition, but the activity of removing a tampon, I suppose, suggests that it's probably in a bathroom. It's interesting that Vartanian picked up on this setting. These works kind of foreground moments usually hidden from view, bringing private actions into a public performative realm. However, in a list of menstrual artworks I'm in the process of compiling, so far only 8% are clearly set in or refer to bathrooms, 3 of those being the ones that we've just talked about. And if you know any more, do let me know. So, like Red Flag, menstrual artworks, many menstrual artworks have a more ambiguous space and tend to focus clearly on the body and/or experience of the artist. As anyone who menstruates or has menstruated knows, periods don't happen only in the bathroom. They happen in bed, at work, on the bus, on the beach, and they might be happening right now in this room. It's also really important that we challenge Vartanian's assertion of the white cube of the gallery as in any way a neutral space. These are political spaces, the walls bearing the weight of intersecting ethical issues and assumptions ranging from economics and class to gender and racial discrimination and corporate responsibility, particularly thinking about kind of connections to environmentalism and gallery sponsorship. So rather than considering the spatial component of menstrual artworks through this domestic architectural lens and this kind of bathroom or not bathroom idea, it's perhaps more pertinent to consider the body space of these works. So in this way we might critically examine the ways artists create a sense of closeness to their bodies in the composition, medium or form of the artwork, for example through the direct presence of the bodies in the work. We might consider how and why artists create a distance or a sense of disjointedness through a conspicuous absence of the body that produced the menstrual blood presented. We can ask what is revealed that challenges established attitudes and canons of knowledge. Depicting menstruation pushes against traditional gendered expectations and to present menstrual experiences that don't conform to contemporary ideals, that being regular and regulated, complicates the traditionally assumed binaries of health, disease, whole, broken, normal, abnormal, that Janet Price connects to biomedical discourses of the body. Menstrual art, as autobiographically entangled, visceral, produced through the body, has the potential to foreground, literally and figuratively, to quote Price again, the material body in the very acts of academic production. It can broaden our cultural understandings of the diversity of menstrual experiences and be used as a tool to anchor theoretical explorations of feminism or critical medical humanities and menstruation studies into tangible situations. Critical approaches to making and analysing menstrual art can contribute towards a radical reframing of the representation of menstruation, challenging gendered notions of contained bodies and behavioural norms through performative strategies and the appropriation of subject positions and languages that constrain the experience of menstruators. Thanks.
That was so interesting. That piece is really powerful. I'm just wondering what the kind of reactions you've experienced to your menstrual art.
Mostly quite positive. I don't tend to put myself in situations where I would encounter very negative ones, which is maybe cowardly. But no, it goes up online and things. I had some quite interesting last year I did an exhibition at the art school where I work, where I put the cycles piece up on the wall in 242 individual digital prints, so it covered a whole wall. It was quite funny installing that as we had heightened security at the time, so as all the extra security guards in the building and people coming in and out, because it was in the foyer area, it took them a little while to realise what it was images of. But mostly people were just a little bit embarrassed, either a little bit embarrassed or really interested. And it was generally, it kind of, people just want to talk about it, or I get to talk about everyone's periods with them, which is really good. Yeah. Some people just tend to, I haven't had much confrontation. I think people tend to be shy or embarrassed rather than confrontational. Yeah, in my experience so far. But we'll see what the feedback from the exhibition outside is.
Thanks, Bea. That was really fascinating. I'm really into data and counting things, and I'm really struck by how a lot of the menstrual art is still very isolated and individual. You know, that it's either your own blood or an image of one person's body, and that was kind of also the idea of the private in the bathroom, that you're on your own in that, and I think that's sort of might link to some of the spiritual aspects where that's, although not accurate in many ways, that it's trying to find solidarity, and of course you'll always then be in tension with all women are the same versus I'm not alone kind of tension, but it was just striking to me that a lot of the images are about the individual, which is strange because we're all told that all women menstruate and it's a debility for all of us, so there's this kind of who's the viewer and who are we looking at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, most of it is fairly individual. Kristen Clifford actually collects menstrual blood from lots of different people in her work. So for that performance, it was a combination of watered down blood from various, like her own and lots of other people's. And I think it had a small amount of bleach in it and stuff like that. So it was to kind of disinfect it again, because it was all clean, but you know, it was just blood. So it was quite interesting. There's some more kind of performance pieces that are more collective. So Damenbilder did like I'm going to forget, somewhere in Scandinavia. Do you remember? No, Sweden. Yeah, I was like, I don't want to say the wrong one. I think in 1971, made a series of kind of tableau performances called Images of Women, and it's Canon Club is the art collective, and it culminated in them decorating a space with kind of lots of red fabrics and cushions that they kind of all lived in for a day or two, and it became this kind of space where they all spoke about their menstruation. So that's kind of really interesting, kind of, and I think came out of that kind of time of like early feminist solidarity in the 1970s, and then obviously Judy Chicago's work was part of a bigger, the menstruation bathroom was part of a whole house installation that other artists had contributed to. But yeah, it is interesting in thinking about more collaborative or ways of looking at it. I think I'd be interested in maybe, getting lots of different menstrual experiences together. Yeah, because also I don't have the authority to show anyone else's at the minute, it's just my own. So anyway,
Right, thank you so much, Bea. I love your work with the imprints of your vulva with or without menstrual blood that is also on that banner and was used last year. And I'm interested in your choice. You said like there's a dread of staining that you're trying to countervene, and I'm wondering what exactly is it about turning the involuntary stain into art that makes it something different? Is it because it's controlled? Is it because you revalue it by exhibiting it in a public space? What happens to that kind of stain when it becomes a mark made intentionally by an artist?
I don't know. There is a transformation, because as soon as we say something's art, it becomes another thing. But there's also a lot, like I can't just exhibit that work anywhere quite easily because of the fact that it's got blood on it. So it's not something I've really dealt with by being really careful and in control of where I've exhibited. And how I've exhibited it. So in some ways it does sort of give it legitimacy. It's not like if I was to do kind of more of a performance piece, and people have, where I'm just walking around with it on my trousers, it would be a completely different thing. Yeah, don't know, I need to, thank you though.
Hey, thank you, this is so fascinating. How has the progression of your health and taking different hormones and maybe not taking hormones affected your creative process and what you want to do?
So the Cycles project I actually did it for longer than 6 months, but then I kept that artwork as a 6-month piece. And it was kind of, I was taking the pill at that point, the progesterone only pill. My menstruation, my cycle was kind of all over the place. But I had a cycle and I could document it. So doing that work, it started off as kind of a way of feeling more in control, because I was at least doing something and documenting it. But then after a while, the process of making the piece itself became like part of this kind of routine that I really didn't like doing. So I was like, remember to take your pill, don't forget to take your pill, go and do your, because I did it last thing at night. So it would be like pill, print, shower, bed, and it just takes over your life. So that's kind of why I stopped doing it. Then I started doing it again a bit later, because I just created this even more restrictive kind of thing for myself. I was like, I don't even want to be taking the pill every night. It's not helping me, and I'm doing so. Yeah, it was weird. And then now I did carry on doing it for a little while after I had the Mirena coil, so that's the hormonal coil. But I did it in a different format. And I did it as a big grid, and I haven't finished it because even though I was still getting periods then, I kind of, still didn't like that process and that restriction. So now I've kind of changed. I'm kind of still working with the images that I made and trying to look at kind of different ways of presenting it. And now my newer work is more thinking about kind of the associated problems that I still have as a hangover of like that I'm ongoing medical kind of diagnosis to find out what the underlying condition is, because I still have this like really severe period pain, or not bleeding but having menstrual cramps. Yeah, the doctor I saw last when I went to hospital, which was really fun, was like, yeah, you shouldn't be getting that, and I was like, no shit. But yeah, so it's kind of just reflecting and like this is where I'm at. I actually made this like on Tuesday in a big panic. Yay. Yeah, my partner was very helpful and helped me with the photography. Yeah, so hot off the presses, but yeah, sorry, I hope that answers your question. It was a bit of a ramble. Cool.
Thank you. I was just interested in sort of a follow-up really to the question just from here, or the comment about the collaborative and collective sort of approach. And it's really interesting, but what struck me is in your work when you spoke about putting the images up in the foyer of the university, and then you said almost as a kind of offhand or side note that you ended up having lots of conversations with people about their periods. So I just wondered how much that's part of your research, because that sounds collaborative and collective.
Yes.
And I wondered how that feeded in really. Fed in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not something that I have like built into my PhD research, but I guess it's something that I could do when I finish. But yeah, no, it is really interesting to see how we can, and Chella knows over there, how much presenting images and artworks about menstruation opens up avenues to talk about it with lots of different people. So whenever I go to a conference, if it's not a menstruation related one, everyone a lot of people always want to have a chat afterwards. So maybe, after I've kind of finished my current research, it would be really interesting to actually look at that as a more kind of, a way to capture more data and find out what people think.